Welcome to The B Word, a women's lifestyle podcast. I'm your host, Katie Ploss. I'm a school psychologist, women's wellness coach, a doula, and the founder of BU, a women's wellness community. I created The B Word to share my stories, knowledge, and training to help you navigate the everyday challenges of being a woman. We discuss everything from navigating dating and relationships, parenting, building a career, to just finding what you're passionate about and figure out who you are meant to be. At The B Word, we aim to destigmatize mental health challenges, grow, heal, and empower you to be your most authentic self. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 7 of The B Word. I am your host, Katie P., and I am back this week with a solo epi. I know I said that last week I was going to have a guest on this week's episode, and unfortunately, technological difficulties and lack of internet connection kept my guest from being able to record with me this week. So we rescheduled that episode, and it will hopefully be coming to your ears in the next couple of weeks. So that left me with, what am I going to talk to you all about this week? And it hit me. This past week on Friday, the Kacey Musgraves album came out. And if you don't know who Kacey Musgraves is, she is a musical goddess of sorts. She's a country music artist, folk country. And I have been a huge fan of her for a long time. And she came out with a new album on Friday called Deeper Well. So after you're done listening to this episode, you have to go listen to at least the song on the album Deeper Well, because that inspired this entire episode. It has been a while since I have covered all things astrology and woo-woo, but after listening to the Deeper Well album, I gotta say, I have a hankering for it, and so here we are. Also, another inspiration for this episode was a psychologist and an astrologer that I follow on Instagram named Dr. Jennifer Freed, and she does a lot of really cool astrology and psychology blend work in her writing and her teachings and products and such. And she wrote a response to a blogger named Adam Grant. And in this article recently, this Adam Grant, who is not surprising, a white man, went on and on about how astrology is not rooted in science and how it's so unscientific. And if you know anything about astronomy, then there's no way you could believe in astrology. And there's so much science out there to debunk all things astrology. And Jennifer Freed, who is both a psychologist and an astrologist, wrote a really well thought out and detailed response, and she posted part of it to her Instagram. And one of the comments on there inspired this episode for me, which was that men that continue to be committed to misunderstanding the value of astrology is my Roman Empire. And I really do think that there is so much value to astrology, even if you don't believe in the science or pseudoscience around it. And I wanted to address that today, and that how it can add value to your life and the way that you think about yourself and your relationship with the world around you. That's really what astrology is all about. And specifically for a lot of my listeners that are in their late 20s and early 30s, and if you're in your early 60s, you may be going through what's called a Saturn return. And this is how it connects to Kacey Musgraves. In the new Kacey Musgraves song, it opens with, "My Saturn has returned." And Nolan and I have been going around the house singing that nonstop. He even got me a sweatshirt that says it on the back. I'm not wearing it right now. I'm wearing my BU sweatshirt right now, but it's a favorite in our house right now. And the Saturn return, and this song has also inspired me to educate Nolan on the topic of what is a Saturn return and what is this astrology BS, and does it have any merit? And I think it does. So I'm going to teach you today what is the Saturn return? I'm sure you've heard about it a lot on social media. And how can you balance the scientific community and the astrology community, and who is right and who is wrong, and where is their value in utilizing astrology in your life? So Dr. Jennifer Freed actually did a good job of balancing both in her Substack response to Adam Grant, and I will link that in the show notes. But I specifically want to point to the section where she talks about where astrology does harm. And a lot of times, people that are committed to misunderstanding astrology overgeneralize the stereotypes that are associated with astrology and have no concept of how complex and comprehensive a birth chart truly is. And that even if your sun sign is in Scorpio, and Scorpios have this very notorious kind of bad rap, that there's other aspects in your chart that could totally offset what a typical Scorpio, stereotypical Scorpio looks like. And people that don't understand astrology don't understand the really nuanced detail of it that can really help people understand themselves. Astrology is a very spiritual practice. So I don't necessarily disagree with astronomers and scientists that are like, there really isn't a scientific relationship with astrology to science and to astronomy and to the to how the planets interact with us as individuals here on Earth. That's all good and dandy. But if spirituality is a part of your life, the majority of spiritual practices have yet to be explained by science. There's a lot of individuals that are naysayers to astrology, but are very religious and are very deeply in belief of Christianity, the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, the fact that Jesus dying on the cross saved us from all of our sins. All of these things, could we really prove any of that by science? I don't think so, but I think that is the position of Western practices, to poo-poo or dismiss any type of practices that are outside of the traditional Western philosophies. And so I think we all should just be really intentional and aware that some of these beliefs and attitudes toward something like astrology being so negatively skewed is really based on historical things like the development of the patriarchy and just really toxic and Western practices, systemic classism, racism, things like that. So again, I'm not saying that astrology is truly a scientific spiritual practice just because it's associated with the planets. I think it gets really overgeneralized. But for me, I do believe that there is a spiritual component that will never be explained by science, but that doesn't invalidate it. So before I go into explaining everything about the Saturn return, I just wanted to make that caveat that if astrology isn't for you, or it hasn't been for you in the past, I invite you to listen to this episode anyway and be really open to maybe something that you're not familiar with. The other thing too is that even if there really isn't any scientific evidence to support astrology, Brene Brown quoted a famous person. I don't even remember what the famous person does. I'd have to look it up. But in the Atlas of the Heart, in Brene Brown's book, I just remember the quote I read this at, is that the limit of my language is the limit of my world. And I really believe that astrology gives people the language to understand themselves, to explore their identity, to interact with their communities and the people around them. And so for that, astrology has a lot of benefits and uses, even if it doesn't have scientific proof that these things are true. And a lot of it is based on belief and faith and your relationship with your spirituality. So going into it with that mindset, I'm going to do Astrology 101, and I'm going to do this as briefly as possible because there is literally so much to astrology, but I feel that I can't adequately explain what a Saturn return is until I explain just like the basics of the birth chart of the different planets. And then we will talk about what specifically Saturn does and what a Saturn return is. The birth chart in the astrology world serves as a map. It's a symbolic representation of the space in which the world was on the day and the time that you were born, and what was going on in the sky at the very moment that you were born. It's like your vantage point from the moment that you entered into this world. So your location of your birth, your time of your birth, and day is really important and impossible to determine without all that information. There's a lot of different ways that birth charts are shown and depicted based on what tradition you are most familiar with. I am most traditional with the approach that Shani Nicholas, who is a really well-known astrologist, uses. And she uses the birth charts that are in the shape of a wheel. And the chart is it's like a circle, like a 360-degree circle. And it's oriented from us on the inside looking out into the world, because the birth chart is ourself. I'm not going to get into some of the weeds of this because it will get really confusing and overwhelming. So a birth chart has 4 essential components. It has the planets, the aspects or the relationships that the planets form with each other, the signs, so Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Libra, Virgo, and then the houses in which those signs reside. I'm not going to get into the houses today because it just gets really overwhelming. And today we're focusing on the Saturn return. But I just want to give you an idea if you're totally new to astrology. There's a concept of a birth chart. There's places where these planets fall on the birth chart in relation to the sky when you were born. And then there are main planets that we look at. So there's the sun, your sun sign. Obviously, that's determined mostly by the month in which you were born. So that's your identity and where you shine. The moon sign, so when the moon was in whatever sign when you were born, that represents your inner self. I don't want to say your dark side, but it's more more of your private side, your emotional side that you usually keep close to the vest, but your most authentic, deepest self. Sun, moon, then there's Mercury. So your Mercury sign is how you communicate with people and how you best do that and where you do that. Venus is the planet of love. So that's how and where you connect with others, how you express love and affection. Mars is typically noted as the sign of action, aggression, sex, war, things like that. It's the spicy part of your chart. Jupiter is how and where you create abundance in your life, financially, relationally, etc., spiritually, all areas. And then there is Saturn, and that is how and where you create boundaries. Saturn is the sign of integrity and how to stay in alignment with where you're supposed to be, who you are supposed to be with, and it is a powerful sign. Those are the main planets, the traditional planets, I should say. And those planets, your sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, most impact your chart. In addition, there are Uranus, so how and where you innovate and disrupt, Neptune, where you use your imagination, and Pluto, how and where you hold power. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are obviously farther away from Earth, and they don't move through the charts as quickly. So Pluto, for example, is a sign of an entire generation. Pluto will stay in the same position for years at a time. But today we are talking about Saturn, okay? So in addition to the planets, like I said, there's the aspects. So when we talk about Saturn, also what plays a role in any of your signs is the relationship at which all your planets have with each other. So how many degrees apart on this circular chart that they're from. So like I said, it starts to get overwhelming. So we're going to just start with the planets. There's so much more to get into here. There's so much more reading about it, right, that you could do. We have to figure out what sign our Saturn is in. So the way that you do that is just running a birth chart. If you don't know what your birth chart is, I will link a free birth chart website that you can put in your time of birth, location of birth, day, and it will tell you what your Saturn sign is. It will tell you what your whole birth chart is, your rising sign, your sun sign, all of the other signs that I just talked about. So Aries is the first sign in the astrological chart, and it's confusing because people that were born in April are Aries, and that's not the first month of our year, of our Georgian calendar year, but it's a different ideology. So again, the new astrology year is Aries. So Aries, their style is independent, action-oriented. Then there's Taurus, stabilizing and grounded are some key words for Taurus. Earthy, it's an earth sign. I'm also not going to get into the elements of the signs because that is also a layer. Gemini is curious, controversial, conversational. They're airy. They're very indecisive at times. The sign of the twins. They can really assimilate to different types of people. Cancer is our emotive. It's a water sign, very caring, deeply feeling sign. Leo is expressive, entertaining, life of the party, intense, fun. Virgo is usually analytical. They're very they're known as being a perfectionist, and not just in their sun sign. Virgos and all of these signs live in all the different planets of your chart. So we want to move away from just like your sun sign is the only astrological stereotype. Like, for example, Virgo is a great one. My grandmother was a Virgo, and I wouldn't say she was like extremely analytical like people always say Virgos are. She was like, if I had to pick her sign, I would say, oh, she's probably like a Leo or like a Scorpio. She's very fiery. She's very intense. She was very loud, boisterous. She was a Virgo. And I know a lot of Virgos that are very intense and loud and crazy. And that's not their stereotype. And so, again, it depends on how the other signs in someone's birth chart are interacting with their sun sign. So there's Virgo. Libras are always known as being the nice, sweet, accommodating sign, all about fairness. Scorpios I was saying that sometimes they get a bad rap. They can be very mysterious, very intense, penetrating. They can be sneaky at times, but just because they're very mysterious. Sagittarius is very positive, buoyant, upbeat. Sometimes they can be a little flighty, but they're mostly pretty like positive. And I shouldn't say flighty because they're not an air sign, but they can be indecisive at times. Capricorn is the sign known for being disciplined, self-restricting, hardworking, very like hard worker mindset oriented. Aquariuses are usually pretty private, intellectual, decisive people. They really highly value independence. And then Pisces are sensitive, creative. They're also a water sign, so they're a deep feeler. So when I talk about these signs, I'm not just talking about it in the sun sign. You're going to have a sign in your Saturn as well, and in your rising, and in your Mercury, and that's going to be different from your sun sign. Like for me, for example, I am a sun in Gemini, I am a rising in Libra, and I'm a moon in Aquarius. So those are really important signs on my chart, and they're all 3 different signs. So which one do I go by? It depends. It depends on what kind of question I'm asking. It depends on the situation that I'm assessing or using astrology for. So it really depends. So Saturn, and then on top of this, different signs are ruled by different planets. So for example, Libra is ruled by Venus. And so Libra is my rising sign, and it's ruled by the planet Venus. So Venus is a really important planet in my chart that I should pay attention to. But my Venus sign is in Taurus. So I also have to pay attention to the Taurus horoscope, especially in all matters of relationships and love and all that stuff. So again, it gets really complicated, and you really have to have a deep understanding of your birth chart to really understand how these different things interact with each other. A lot of times people just pay to get their birth chart read by a professional. There are people that professionally do this because it is that complex. So you're not going to get the entire thing in a 30 to 45-minute podcast. But this is just, again, crash course Astrology 101 so that we can use this foundation to talk about the Saturn return. So a Saturn return happens approximately every 29 and a half years. That's how long it takes Saturn to orbit the sun. 29 of like Earth years. So that means every 29 and a half years, generally it returns. It's in the same sign at which you were born for approximately 2.5 to 3 years. So every planet in astrology has its own orbit, and it crosses through all 12 zodiac signs of the sky. So like every planet and your moon and stuff, it takes a different amount of time to orbit the sun. Or the moon is obviously, like, our moon is orbiting our Earth. So like the moon sign rapidly rotates. The ascendant signs, I think, change in the sky every few hours. But Saturn is one of those farther away planets that only comes around every 30 years. So remember how I was saying that each planet has like a certain signature? Saturn's is integrity. Saturn's is, are we really in alignment with what we are supposed to be doing in our life? So a Saturn return happening when you're 29 and 30, a lot of people experience these really earth-shattering, life-shaking events in that time period of their life. What's interesting is that this isn't the only time in your life that your Saturn will return. Your Saturn will return also when you're in your early 60s as well, because it's every 30 years. So a lot of people also experience a lot of life changes at that time too, like retirement, like becoming grandparents, like their families really change too, even in your early 60s. So it's not the only time that this occurs in your chart. Saturn is just not a casual sign. And that's why people talk about it so much, and that's why it shakes people up so much. It teaches us that when the going gets tough, we actually keep going. And that perseverance, that tenacity is actually incredibly empowering. For me, I was born in this like in-between time where Saturn was in Aquarius, and then for 4 weeks it went to Pisces, and then it went back to Aquarius for a little bit, and then it went back into Pisces like a year after that. And that happens with the planets. They like, with the way that the relationships and the way they aspect, I don't entirely understand it, but they retrograde sometimes. So when I was born in this 4-week period of a Saturn retrograde, so technically my Saturn is in Pisces, but most people that were born around the time of that I was born, their Saturn is in Aquarius. I really way more identify that my Saturn return really happened during Aquarius. Because everything in my life personally exploded and blew the F up during Saturn's return in Aquarius. And I really don't align with that my Saturn return is happening right now in Pisces, because I felt like I already went through that experience. But I digress. Because Saturn is the planet of responsibilities, time, and wisdom, it's really like your astrological coming of age. The push you need to enter true adulthood. When you go through your Saturn return, this planet is demanding that you take full and complete accountability for your choices, for your up until this point in your life. If you are on a road that you are not aligning with, or that isn't pushing you towards your true purpose, your Saturn return is going to feel like you got hit by a ton of bricks. And for me, that was the case. I was in a relationship that I'd been in for a long time, that I anticipated was going to lead to marriage. And during my Saturn return, that shit just rocked my fucking world. And it pushed, and that whole experience and everything that happened in the 2 years after that completely put me on a different path into where I'm supposed to be now. And so when I first learned about the Saturn return, when I was going through all that stuff, it resonated with me so much. I was like, yes, I completely understand this. And this has got to be true. Like, I feel so aligned with this. And so, like I was saying, your late 20s are often a time when massive life-changing transformation occurs. We're breaking up, we're making up, we're changing careers, we're moving, and we're really becoming our true selves. And that's why I also felt so strongly that this was such an important topic to do on the B word, because the B word is all about being our most authentic self. And there's nothing that's going to make you become your most authentic self more than the Saturn return, if you ask me. Your second Saturn return, if you're a little bit older, it's manifesting more as like the stereotypical midlife crisis. After establishing routines and structure in your 30s, your second Saturn return may force you to reconsider these realities as you question whether you're actually living to your highest potential. Like, did I do all the things I was going to do? And then if you're lucky enough to make it to your third Saturn return, that's a time, and that happens in your 80s, 90s. This is a time for powerful reflection. You'll look back at your life, you'll contemplate your successes, your failures, your blessings, your regrets, and you'll look back and say, did I do what I set out to do in this lifetime? And so it has the potential to be an extremely spiritual moment to consider your legacy, what you want to leave behind, and your hopes for the other side, and if you believe in that spiritual side of heaven. And so it's not casual at all. It's just not. So again, it's just a really, really great place to take stock of, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are you on the right track to becoming who you are supposed to be? You're gonna be okay. If things really blow up and some serious shit happens, it might feel like doom and gloom in the beginning, but I will tell you from experience, my Saturn return ended up being the most amazing time in my life, where I like really became who I was supposed to be and becoming who I am supposed to be. And so I really do agree with the advice, and I'm going to link this article too that I was referencing as I was going through this. And I really agree with the advice in this article from The Cut that the most important piece of navigating your Saturn return is embracing it. Trust the process, do the scary thing, and be brave about it. If it's leaving that deadbeat relationship, if it's taking a different job, if it's going back to school, whatever it is, just do it and embrace it, because you're being nudged in the direction that you're supposed to go. Any attempts to ignore Saturn's powerful nudges toward personal growth will be futile. Trust me on that. I tried. Didn't work. On the other side of your Saturn return, everything in your life will be different. There will be a before and there will be an after. And for me, that also really resonated. There was a before and an after of my Saturn return and all the experiences I had during that time. But through effort and patience and practice, I feel that I have arrived in reaping like the most benefits from that time. And I grew so much. And so it was worth it. Like, it really was. I don't know I think for the non-believers, this like Saturn return thing, it really isn't going to convince you either way that astrology is legit. But I hope for people that are open-minded, this can give them some language to apply to themselves and thinking about who they are and how they fit in the world. That's what astrology is. And so if the Saturn return resonates with you like it resonated with me, then it's a positive thing. Who gives a shit if people are going to naysay it and say it's a bunch of pseudoscience? It's not for them then. That's fine. Do whatever works for you. That's the whole purpose of the B word, is doing things that are authentic to us. And so whatever spiritual practice is authentic to you, if that's astrology, if it's Christianity, if it's Wiccan, if it's Buddhism, if it is being Muslim, if it is whatever it is, do what works for you. And really, but I encourage everybody to explore their spirituality. And if you don't have a relationship with spirituality, I really do recommend astrology as a place to start. Just think about yourself and your relationship to the planets around you in this ginormous world that we feel like specks of dust in sometimes. I personally love astrology. If you're looking for a place to start and learn more about astrology, if I piqued your interest and you want to learn about the planets more and the houses and the aspects and what your birth chart is, like I said, I linked a birth chart in the show notes. I also will link my favorite app that I use to get weekly readings and to look at my birth chart and to learn more about my birth chart, which is the Shani Nicholas app. I really like that one. So I will link information about that too. And really, at the end of the day, like, I think mostly the stereotype that I will perpetuate a little bit is that most people that kind of dismiss astrology are usually men. And it usually does have a connection to the patriarchy, and that it's like a girly, frilly, silly practice, when really it is it's a spiritual practice that is rooted in hundreds and thousands of years of spirituality in more of the eastern side of the world. And so it is worth at least opening your mind to and learning about, even if you don't understand it. In the spirit of that, it was International Women's Day last week or 2 weeks ago, and I did not acknowledge that on the podcast. But I think the whole month we are celebrating women. So it's the perfect time to go on the BU community website and get your BU merch. I'm wearing my white zip up right now. It's got my logo on the back, the BU Women's Wellness on the front. I also have some other goodies like my digital planners and workbooks and my birth education class too, which in the next few episodes, I also will be talking to you guys about that as well. So I can't wait to be back next week with another episode and just some more knowledge to spit at you all. Until then, this has been another episode of The B Word, and I will see you guys next Monday. That's all for this episode of The B Word. Don't forget to check out the show notes for any resources we shared with you today, as well as finding our links to our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube channel, and our website, bucommunity.com. You can find out all of our course offerings, memberships, opportunities to work with me individually, and more. That's all for now. See you next time.